I thought they were my closest friends, people I could trust with my life. But when I showed up to what I thought would be a casual dinner, they humiliated me in front of everyone, all because of a secret they'd been hiding. The betrayal wasn't just painful, it was a wake-up call. I had spent years building my life around people who didn't care if I succeeded or failed. But what happened next? It wasn't just a lesson in trust. It was the moment I took control of everything I had worked for and turned their rejection into my greatest opportunity. The vibrant chatter of the city hummed in the background as I stood outside the sleek glass building, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced down at the notification. A text message from one of my best friends, Laura, popped up. "Hey, Madison, we're all meeting at Max's tonight, 8 p.m. Can't wait to see you there. It's been forever." I smiled to myself. It had been weeks since I had caught up with my old college friends, and tonight seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect. Max's was a high-end restaurant I'd only ever heard about, the kind of place where business deals were made and important conversations were had. To be invited felt like an acknowledgement, a place where I finally belonged. At least that's what I thought. I hadn't even fully entered the building when my phone buzzed again. This time it was from Kelly, another one of my friends in the group. "Madison, so sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to double check that you're still coming tonight." It struck me as a bit odd. Kelly and I had been friends for years, and there was rarely any need for extra confirmation. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe she just wanted to be sure, given how busy we all were lately. "Of course, I'll be there. Looking forward to it," I texted back. The dinner was supposed to be a casual get-together, something fun, relaxing, and filled with laughter. I had a good feeling about the night. What could possibly go wrong? I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this dinner might bring me closer to the group in ways that I had longed for. I hadn't realized yet that the very people I considered my closest friends had already started plotting behind my back. That evening, I arrived early, eager to be the first to greet everyone. The hostess at Max's led me to a table by the window, where the lights from the city flickered outside. As I sat down, I looked at the menu, pretending to focus on the options, but in reality, I was lost in thought. I hadn't seen the girls in such a long time. Everything felt so nostalgic. I thought about our college days, our shared memories of late-night talks, and how they had always seemed so supportive of my career. At least I had thought they were. Just as I was starting to relax, the door opened. Laura walked in first, her usual confident stride almost commanding attention. She waved enthusiastically when she saw me, but I noticed her eyes darting to the hostess and then back to me, as though she was carefully assessing the situation. Behind her, Kelly and a few others followed. "Madison," Laura called, smiling brightly, though there was something in her voice that didn't quite match the warmth of her greeting. "Hey, Laura," I said, standing up to hug her. But as soon as I stepped forward, my heart sank. I saw them, my friends, sitting at the table, looking at me with blank expressions. They had already taken their seats, and no one was moving to make room for me. There was a sharp, uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. Laura, is this the right table?" I asked, my voice steady, though a strange knot had formed in my stomach. Laura gave me a thin smile. "Actually, Madison, I think you've got the wrong table." "What?" My voice faltered. "No, there must be some mistake. I I'm with you guys," Kelly's voice interrupted, flat and dismissive. "You're not on the guest list. We assumed you'd be joining us later, but maybe try the lounge instead?" I stood frozen. My eyes flicked over to the hostess, who was watching me with an uncomfortable expression. She glanced back at the tablet in her hand, clearly unsure of what to do. I could see her searching for something, anything, that would confirm I was indeed meant to be here. "No, this can't be right," I said, the words barely escaping my throat as my thoughts scrambled. I got the invitation. Look, I have the text from Laura. My phone buzzed again. It was the same message I had received earlier from Laura. I held up my phone for them to see. See? I'm invited. This is my seat. Laura's smile tightened as she glanced at her friends, her gaze shifting uncomfortably. Oh, Madison, she said, her voice suddenly laced with a cold sweetness. That text was from a while ago. Maybe there was some miscommunication. Tonight's dinner is for people who really matter. I felt my stomach twist, my blood running cold. I turned to look at Kelly, who avoided my eyes, a slight frown on her face. Don't make a scene, Madison, Kelly added, her tone suddenly sharp and detached. I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. This wasn't the night I had imagined. This wasn't a casual dinner with friends. This felt like a calculated exclusion. They had already made their choice. I wasn't welcome. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn around and walk out the door. This wasn't just a mistake. This was intentional. My friends, the people I had trusted for so long, had already decided I didn't belong here. But then something shifted inside me. I took a deep breath, looked up at Laura, and said calmly, "It's fine. I'll just talk to the owner." The words came out before I could stop them, a sharpness to my tone that I hadn't intended but couldn't take back. For a moment, everything went silent. It was as if time had paused. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to happen, but I knew that I wouldn't let this slide. I wouldn't let my friends or anyone treat me like I was invisible. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, my heels clicking more aggressively than usual. The cold air from the kitchen vents blew gently against my skin, but it did nothing to calm the heat rising within me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being humiliated, not just by their actions, but by the fact that I hadn't seen it coming. I had thought we were friends, but now it seemed like they were all in on some secret I wasn't invited to. As I approached the manager's desk, I noticed the way people around me glanced over. I wasn't just a guest at this restaurant anymore. I was an intruder, someone who didn't belong. That thought stung more than I had expected. "Can I help you?" The manager, a tall man in a crisp uniform, looked up at me with professional indifference, but I could see the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "I'm here to speak with the owner," I said, my voice steady, despite the confusion and hurt bubbling inside. "There seems to be a mistake. I'm on the guest list, but I was just told I'm not welcome. Can you please let him know?" The manager raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "The owner? Mr. Max isn't here tonight, but I can assist you." I shook my head, trying to keep my composure. I didn't want to make a scene, but at the same time, I wasn't going to let this go quietly. I was done being the easy target. "It's not about the owner being here. It's about the fact that my friends just—" I stopped myself. My emotions had started to take over, but I fought them down. I wasn't here to explain myself to a stranger. I was here to fix what had been broken. "Just let him know I'm here. I'll wait." The manager hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking over my outfit, the new dress I had splurged on, hoping it would help me fit in better with this crowd, the very dress that now seemed to scream of my desperation. "All right," he said finally, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, and moved toward the back office. As I waited, I could hear the laughter from the main dining area. It was the sound of a group of people enjoying themselves, making memories, while I stood alone, unsure of how I had gotten to this point. How had I allowed myself to be taken for granted for so long? I had been nothing but loyal to them, and now I was standing outside, hoping for a chance to prove that I was worthy of being there. But why did I need to prove it at all? Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. The idea of confronting the owner, someone I didn't even know, was terrifying. But it was the only option I had left. I couldn't let them get away with this, not without understanding why they had treated me this way. The door behind the manager opened, and a familiar voice echoed through the hall. Madison, what's going on? I turned around almost too quickly, and there he was, Max, the owner. His face was kind, with an easy smile that hadn't quite reached his eyes. He looked surprised to see me, but I could tell he hadn't been briefed on the situation yet. What are you doing here? Everything okay? His tone was warm, but there was an underlying tension that I couldn't quite place. I stood up straighter, trying to shake off the whirlwind of emotions that were threatening to spill over. Actually, no. I was just told by my friends that I'm not invited to their dinner. They told me to go somewhere else. Max's smile faltered as he looked at me, clearly confused. What do you mean? You've been invited, right? Laura sent me a message. She said everything was set. I nodded, pulling out my phone and showing him the text. This is the invitation I received, I said, my voice thick with disbelief. But when I got there, they told me I wasn't on the guest list. Max's eyes scanned the message, and his brow furrowed in confusion. I'm so sorry. That doesn't make any sense. Let me take care of this, he said, motioning for the manager to join him. I took a step back, feeling the sudden weight of everything around me. I couldn't believe what was happening. I had spent the last few years thinking I was part of a group of friends that had my back, and yet here I was, alone in the hallway of a fancy restaurant, trying to explain why I deserved to be part of the evening they had all seemingly decided I wasn't welcome to. Max turned to me once more, his voice lowering to a more serious tone. Don't worry, Madison. I'll make sure this is sorted out. I'll speak to the team and make sure you're treated properly. But before I could say anything else, he walked away, and the manager followed him, leaving me in the silence of the hallway, my pulse racing. I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that my friends had planned this behind my back, or that I had allowed it to get this far. Whatever their reasons for treating me like this, I had to confront them. I had to understand why I had become a target in their eyes, and more than anything, I had to figure out what I was going to do next. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for Max and the manager to return. The noise from the restaurant continued, laughter, clinking glasses, and the muffled hum of conversations. But none of it made me feel like I belonged. The longer I stood in that hallway, the more the sting of their rejection intensified. I had tried to ignore the signs, to brush off the little things over the past few months. But now everything was clear. My so-called friends weren't just distant or busy. They had intentionally excluded me. I wasn't part of their plans, not anymore. Max finally returned, his face more serious now. The manager trailed behind him, a little more composed than he had been before, but still uneasy. Max's presence felt both like a comfort and a reminder of how much I was losing. He turned to me, his expression tight, as if he wasn't sure how to deliver the news. Madison, I don't know what's going on with your friends, but I've spoken to them. They, well, it seems they've decided this dinner wasn't for you. Max's voice was reluctant, almost apologetic, but his words hit harder than I expected. They what? I said, my voice rising in disbelief. They decided? Who decided that? I received an invite, Max. They can't just... I paused, trying to compose myself, but the rawness of it all made it hard. Why would they do this? I thought we were friends. Max looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. I don't know, Madison, but it's clear they've made their choice. I can't change that. All I can do is offer you a seat here at the bar, or even in a private area if you'd prefer. But as for the dinner, it's just not meant to include you tonight. His words settled like a cold weight in my chest. I didn't want to cry in front of him, in front of anyone, but I couldn't stop the tears from welling up. This wasn't just a dinner. This wasn't just a minor social mishap. This was the culmination of months, maybe even years, of feeling like an outsider in a group I had once considered my closest friends. I turned my back on Max, walking towards the exit. The bar could wait. The private area didn't matter. There was no point in pretending that this wasn't a slap in the face. They had made it clear that I wasn't welcome, and no amount of being nice or polite could change that. As I walked out, the city's chill hit me like a splash of cold water. The sounds of the busy streets felt oddly distant, muffled by the roar in my head. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and stared out into the sea of people, all moving with purpose, oblivious to the chaos swirling inside me. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, not with them, not in that space where everything was a lie. I needed to clear my head. I needed to figure out what to do next. I walked aimlessly for a while, replaying every conversation, every moment I had shared with them. There had to be a reason. Why had they suddenly cut me out? Why had they turned on me this way? The answer came to me slowly. It wasn't personal, not in the way I had thought. It wasn't about my friendship or my past actions. It was about money, about greed. I had always been the friend they could rely on for support, for help when they needed it. But now, something had changed. They were after more success, more connections, and I had something they wanted, something they were willing to betray me for. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from Kelly. "We'll see you around, right?" Laura was just being dramatic. She didn't mean to exclude you. I stared at the message, the words feeling like salt in an open wound. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. A text. After everything that had happened, this was the best they could come up with? As if a simple apology could fix it. I thought about responding, calling them out, but I realized there was no point. They didn't even understand what they had done, let alone how deep the betrayal went. I pocketed the phone, a feeling of finality settling over me. Whatever I thought I had with them, it was gone now. There was no turning back, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure how to feel. Anger, sadness, betrayal, all of it twisted together in a knot I couldn't untangle. But as I walked through the streets, the weight on my chest lightened just a bit. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let this define me. I had always relied on them, but now I would have to rely on myself. And maybe, just maybe, this betrayal was the push I needed to finally start living for me, not for them. I stood at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, when the next message came through. This time, it was from Max. "I'm sorry, Madison. I don't think this is over yet, but when you're ready, we can talk. I know it's hard right now, but I want you to know you're not alone in this." I stared at the words, not sure how to respond. He was right about one thing. It wasn't over. But the question was, what was I going to do about it? What was I willing to do? I made my way home, feeling exhausted, but resolute. Tonight wasn't the end of this story. The betrayal was just the beginning. And if I had learned anything from all of this, it was that I wasn't the person they had tried to make me feel like. I wasn't weak. I wasn't a doormat. I was stronger than they had ever given me credit for, and whatever they had planned, they hadn't seen the last of me. The next few days felt like an emotional roller coaster. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I kept replaying the night at Max's over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Every text, every conversation seemed to have a new meaning now. Kelly's words about Laura being dramatic felt hollow, an excuse, something to brush off the guilt. I had been discarded so easily, but what hurt more was how they had dismissed me, as if I were an afterthought. They didn't care enough to explain, to even acknowledge the pain they had caused. I felt like I was just a footnote in their lives, an accessory to their story, not a central character like I had believed. I couldn't afford to dwell on it forever, though. I had my own life to live, my own goals to chase. Still, it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. The betrayal weighed heavily on my thoughts, making it difficult to focus on anything else. I had always been the one they came to for help, the one who was always there when they needed something. Now, I was nothing but a tool they had used when it suited them. It was on the fourth day after the dinner that I received a call from Laura. My stomach twisted at the sight of her name on the screen, but I answered anyway, figuring I owed it to myself to hear her out. Madison, Laura's voice came through flat and strained. I've been thinking about what happened, and I just want to say I'm sorry. It wasn't right. You didn't deserve that. I wanted to yell, to tell her how badly she had hurt me, but I held back. The words I had been rehearsing for days felt stuck in my throat. Instead, I managed a quiet, "Why did you do it, Laura? Why did you treat me like that?" There was a long pause before she replied, her voice barely audible. "It's not just me, Madison. The whole group felt like things had changed. I," she faltered, as if struggling to find the right words. "We thought you were moving ahead, with your business and all, and we felt left behind. We were jealous, honestly. It's not easy to admit that, but that's the truth." Jealous. The word hung in the air like a weight, heavy and suffocating. I was stunned. The betrayal hadn't been about me at all. It had been about their insecurities, their envy. They had made me feel small, like an outsider, because they couldn't handle the fact that I was doing well. They had taken advantage of my kindness and turned it into a weapon. The realization stung more than I had anticipated. All these years, I had been the one supporting them, lifting them up, and in return, they had been quietly undermining me out of jealousy. "You're jealous?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You think that's why you cut me out? Because you were jealous?" Laura's voice dropped, barely a whisper now. "I'm sorry, Madison. I really am." But it wasn't just about jealousy. It was more about control. We felt like we didn't know where we stood with you anymore. Things were changing. You were moving ahead with your agency, getting recognition, and she sighed deeply. "We just didn't know how to handle it." I felt a cold wave of understanding wash over me. It wasn't just that they had betrayed me for money or status. It was that they had seen my success as a threat, something that made them feel less significant. They didn't want me to succeed unless it was in the ways they approved of, in ways that kept me tethered to the group. And now they were admitting it, finally. But it was too little, too late. "Laura, I don't know what you want me to say. You can't just tear someone down and expect everything to go back to normal." I felt the anger rising in my chest now, my words growing sharper with every syllable. "You had your chance to be my friend, but you chose to turn your back on me when it was convenient. You didn't just leave me out of that dinner, you left me out of your lives. And I can't pretend like that didn't matter." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and I could hear Laura's breath catch, as if she had expected something different from me. Finally, she spoke again, her voice small, almost defeated. "I understand. I get it now. I just, I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I really am." I wanted to hang up, to tell her that it was over, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the hope that somehow we could still salvage something from the wreckage of our friendship. Or maybe it was just a sense of closure that I needed. "I don't need an apology, Laura," I said finally. "I need to move on from this. And so do you." The conversation ended shortly after, with neither of us saying anything else. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. There would be no more pretending, no more hoping that things could go back to the way they were. What had happened was irreversible, and I needed to accept that. The next morning, I woke up with a clearer head. I had spent far too much time agonizing over people who hadn't valued me the way I deserved. The realization was harsh but liberating. I had spent years being the person who kept the peace, who smoothed things over when they went wrong. But I had learned the hard way that you can't force people to respect you, and you certainly can't make them see your worth if they're too consumed by their own insecurities. I grabbed my phone and started drafting an email to my business partner, Jade. We had a meeting later that week, and I wanted to make sure I was fully prepared. It was time to stop looking backward and focus on what was ahead. It was time to start building the future I deserved, one where I didn't have to depend on anyone else's approval. And if that meant walking away from old friendships, so be it. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. The following days passed in a blur of work and reflection. I threw myself into my agency, determined to regain the sense of control I had lost in the wake of the betrayal. My mind often wandered back to my old friends, but I kept pushing those thoughts aside. There was no use in dwelling on what they had done. What mattered now was building something meaningful, something I could truly be proud of. Jade and I met for our usual brainstorming sessions. She noticed the shift in my mood immediately. There was a calmness to me now that hadn't been there before. She asked how things had been going with my friends, and I found myself hesitating. It was difficult to explain what had happened without feeling vulnerable. I didn't want to relive the sting of their actions, but I knew Jade deserved the truth. So I told her about the dinner, the betrayal, and the painful realization that my friends had seen me as nothing more than a tool for their own insecurities. Jade listened quietly, her brow furrowed. "That's messed up, Madison," she finally said. "But you know what? You don't need them. You've built this business from the ground up. And look at where you are now. They're just a chapter in your life that's over." Her words hit home harder than I expected. I had spent so much of my life seeking validation from people who had no intention of offering it, and now I realized that validation was never going to come from them. I had to find it within myself. I didn't need their approval to be successful. I had already proven I could make it on my own. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, calls, and client work. The agency was thriving, and our client list grew with each successful campaign. Still, despite the forward momentum in my professional life, something kept gnawing at me. I hadn't fully let go of the idea that there might be a way to fix things with my old friends. I kept hoping they'd realize their mistake, that they'd come back and apologize. But each time I thought about reaching out, I reminded myself of the truth. They had chosen their path, and now I had to choose mine. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from Max, the owner of the restaurant, the same person who had unknowingly been part of my rejection that night. My stomach tightened when I saw his name on the screen. I hadn't expected to hear from him again, not after everything that had transpired. But I answered, curiosity outweighing my hesitation. "Madison," he said, his voice carrying a serious tone, "I know this might be a strange request, but I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night. And I wanted to ask, would you be willing to come by the restaurant sometime soon? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." My heart skipped a beat. What could he possibly want to discuss? After everything with my friends, I couldn't imagine what there was left to talk about. But part of me was still curious, and I agreed to meet him the following day. The next evening, I found myself walking through the familiar doors of Max's restaurant. The dim lighting and the familiar hum of conversation reminded me of how much had changed. I had been so eager to be part of that world once, so desperate for their approval. Now, I was walking in on my own terms, no longer seeking validation from people who didn't care about me. Max greeted me warmly, though I could tell there was some tension in his eyes. He led me to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the bustling tables. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I've been meaning to apologize. Not for what happened that night. It wasn't my fault. But for not stepping in sooner, for not seeing what was going on with your friends." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You didn't have to apologize for that, Max. You were just trying to help. It's not your responsibility." He shook his head. "Maybe not, but I've been thinking about it. I know you're a successful businesswoman now. I've seen the work you've done, and I'm impressed. So, I want to make you an offer, one that's personal, not business related." I was taken aback. "What kind of offer?" Max looked around, ensuring we weren't overheard, and then he leaned in slightly. "You're the kind of person who knows how to make things happen. I've been looking for a partner, someone who has the drive and vision to help me take this restaurant to the next level. I want to offer you a stake in the restaurant, not as a client, but as a partner." I sat there in shock, the weight of his words sinking in slowly. A partner? In his restaurant? My mind raced. This was a huge opportunity, an opportunity I had never expected, especially after everything that had happened with my friends. But in that moment, I realized that this was exactly what I needed. This was the validation I had been searching for all along, not from my old friends, not from anyone else, but from someone who saw my potential. I I don't know what to say," I finally stammered. "This is an incredible offer, but "You don't have to answer right now," he said, cutting me off. "I just wanted to put it out there. You've earned your place in this industry, and I think you have a lot to offer. Think about it." I sat there for a moment, absorbing everything he had just said. In some ways, it felt like the culmination of everything I had worked for, being offered a place at the table, not because of who I knew or who I was trying to impress, but because of what I had achieved on my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. When I left the restaurant that night, I walked out with my head held high. I knew what I had to do. I didn't need to look back. My friends were part of my past, but they didn't have a place in my future. And as for me, well, I was just getting started. The future was mine to create, and no one was going to take that away from me. I took Max's offer, and it was the best decision I ever made. As I sat at the head of the table in that restaurant, negotiating deals and planning for the future, I realized that everything had come full circle. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also been the catalyst for my growth. I had learned to trust myself and my instincts, and I had discovered that I didn't need anyone's approval to be successful. That was the moment I knew for certain I was finally living life on my own terms,